Hello, everyone, and welcome to Economics and You. I'm your host, Mr. Samuelson. Today, we're going to be looking at monopolies, oligopolies, and monopolistic competition, three other aspects of market competition apart from perfect competition, which we looked at last time. Let's start with monopoly, and we're going to spend most of our time with monopoly here because it's the most important for us to understand. Monopoly is the most extreme form of imperfect competition. Basically, when you have a monopoly, there is no competition. You have a single seller in the market, one person that controls the supply. So if you want a good or if you want that service, you have to go to just that one company, which means that they get to charge whatever price they want. You can't go to a competitor. There are no competitors. If you want this good or if you want that service, you go to that one firm. That is a true monopoly. Now, it is important to know laws of supply and demand still apply. That monopoly cannot charge so much for its good that nobody can afford it and therefore nobody will buy it. But it does have the only product. There are no reasonable alternatives out there. Fortunately, today in the United States, we don't have as much of a problem with monopoly as we used to. We used to have individuals like this guy right here. Rockefeller was in control of over 90% of the oil supplies for the United States in the late 1800s. He was so wealthy that he could just basically buy anything that he wanted, including a lot of congressmen that he paid for he paid for everything and got them into office. And they made sure that he had laws in place that would protect his business. That happened until the early 1900s when we got to break that up. All right, types of monopolies. There's not just one type of monopoly. There are 4 different types of monopolies that we are going to look at today. Natural, geographic, technological, and government. Natural is naturally going to come first. Natural monopolies. This is when a government exists and it grants an exclusive right to a business to provide a particular good or service. That is, the government is going to protect one business's right to control the supply. Now, this is done sometimes with stuff like public transportation, buses. Buses are typically run by a private organization, not necessarily the city, but that one company has a right. It doesn't have to compete with other bus companies. This is also done with electricity. We all know DTE. It's done with cable. We all know Comcast. These guys put down an incredible investment. DTE runs power lines. Comcast runs cable lines. And they don't have to compete with other companies and have multiple cable lines running through cities. One company gets the right to lay all the cable lines. They have to make that huge upfront investment, but they then get to profit because they have a monopoly. That's the idea of the larger size. They can have more resources and use them more efficiently. Now, a geographic monopoly, now we're talking on scales that are very small. These happen in isolated locations, usually with very low populations. So you've got a small village out in the middle of nowhere. They're 50 miles from the next village over. Any business that exists there is going to have a decent shot of having a monopoly just because there's no other competition and there's not enough demand in the area for that competition to exist. So your local general store, they're going to have a lot of say over the economy of that particular village. Now, chances are these isolated villages in the middle of nowhere, they're not generally very wealthy, so you can't raise your prices through the roof, but there's no price competition. So you can charge more for a can of beans at that general store than you would get at, the Kroger down the street. Technological monopolies exist for a very important reason. We want to protect inventors because we want to encourage people to invent new things. So inventors get to have a technological monopoly over their invention. That is generally, we have a patent process. So if you invent something new or a new process, you apply for a government patent. That is a government protection over what you just created. And you usually have the exclusive right to profit from your invention for 20 years. Now, what you do with this right is up to you. You might invent a new process, but not actually be able to apply it because maybe it's a new process for how to run a factory more efficiently, but you don't have the money to start up more factories. What you can do is you can license this patent out. Other people will pay you for the right to use your process until your patent expires, at which point they don't need to pay you anything anymore because you don't have that monopoly. But to protect innovation, we do have intentional technological monopolies. We have government monopolies. This is our fourth and final kind. It's very much like a natural monopoly. That is, it exists because it takes a whole lot of resources to make the business exist in the first place. And we want to consolidate those resources and put it under the management of one group. But in this case, that one group is the government. Road construction and maintenance is one of these, as is the United States Postal Service. It takes a lot of resources to even start one of these projects. So the government stepped in, the government said, we're going to take care of it, and they do so. Now, people can argue whether or not we need this, and certainly in America today, under President Trump, we're leaning away from government monopolies, maybe breaking up the Postal Service, maybe making more roads, private roads, that is toll roads. We'll see where that goes. But right now, the government has monopolies there. All right, oligopoly. We're just going to briefly touch on oligopoly. They're similar to monopolies in the sense that there's not a lot of firms, not a lot of businesses involved, but there are a few. Telecommunications is a good example in the United States. Basically, there's AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile. There are some other little ones out there, but their share of the market is so incredibly small that they're not worth mentioning. These four pretty much own the telecommunications market. Now, they're not as harmful to consumers as monopolies. These guys do have to compete with each other, so AT&T just can't shoot its rates through the roof. They'll lose business if they do that. But the danger here is that it's easy for an oligopoly to collude, that is, to work with each other to make sure that nobody's prices go too low. They can do this directly, which is illegal. They actually sit down and have a meeting and say, hey, nobody's going to charge less than this. Or they can just have an implicit understanding that they're not going to do that, which is much more common and much more easy to do than our legal system likes to pretend. All right, monopolistic competition. Confusing here because it has the word monopolistic in there, and it sounds like monopoly, but is actually significantly further from a monopoly than an oligopoly is. It's closer to a perfect competition situation. And monopolistic competition is common in the United States. This is where you've got a large number of businesses that offer a similar but slightly different product. The difference here between monopolistic competition and perfect competition is perfect competition, everybody is a small firm. In monopolistic competition, you might have several that are larger. You might have 3 companies that control 50% of the market. But then you've got the other 50% controlled by these other 15 companies. So it does have a lot of companies. It's not just a few that can work together to really control the market. Because there's much more competition, advertising becomes really key to being successful. And once you hook somebody in, once you build that brand loyalty through advertising and then product success, you can raise your prices a little bit. If you go to the store, Colgate toothpaste, everybody knows Colgate toothpaste, and they're more likely to buy Colgate toothpaste than some other brand that is really just the exact same product, but you don't know its name. That's where the monopolistic competition gets in, and that's where we don't have perfect competition. Because if we have perfect competition, Colgate couldn't charge more. But in monopolistic, they can because they're large enough and they're a well enough known name. All right, so differences. One more time through. Monopolies have a single supplier, just one, and has complete control over the prices. Oligopolies only have a few suppliers, so they do compete, but they could also collude. That is, they could all have kind of a nod and a wink agreement to keep their prices high. Monopolistic competition is when many suppliers have slightly different product and compete with each other through advertising, but we might still have more people in the market. And then, of course, perfect competition we dealt with last time. That is, everybody is a small firm. Everybody is competing on the exact same playing field. Everybody has basically the same prices. All right. Thank you for joining me today for Economics and You. I hope you learned something today, and farewell.